Hello and welcome to episode 25, 2 followed by 5, of the From the Vault podcast. Hello, I'm your host, the always here, Nathaniel Forsyth, and with me,
the eternal,
the often here, Holthauser. How are you doing?
Yeah, pretty well. Had a bit of a busy day, a little bit stressed out. I'm glad to be able to come back home and talk about Magic for a while, especially for the quarter century.
Yeah,
podcast
has been going on as long as Magic, I think.
I mean,
if I line up those numbers right.
I mean, I was more thinking about like cricket centuries, you know.
Oh,
you know what I mean, where you get 100 points in a century.
I mean, I feel like a century just kind of is like 100.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be in cricket. It can just be 100.
I mean, why'd you related it to time? I feel like you took us down this misadventure now.
I feel like I feel like you need to explain that I was trying to make a joke and that it was, but you're killing it.
That's terrible.
You're killing it.
I mean, so many people would just say that.
You were just annihilating it from orbit.
To be fair,
it's the worst.
To be fair, I'm not very good at jokes.
It's okay, we've got me for that.
I'm a very unfunny person.
It's true.
Anyway.
He just sits there sourly eating crackers when we hang out. It's a really tough time.
I mean, actually, they're farthing biscuits. Thank you.
Okay, we're actually not here to talk about whatever it is that we just talked about. We're here to talk about Magic, the Gathering, the card game by Wizards of the Coast. We have had some exciting developments in Magic the Gathering recently, I think. And
by exciting, it's kind of... I mean, on the level of it, it's not like a couple of very interesting, crazy things have happened. I think of it more like Aldous Huxley and A Brave New World, where he said the future would be full of so much information that no one would care.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, if you're... that's pretty apt, actually. If you're plugged into to a competitive standard, as indeed you should be.
Which you should be,
because it's great.
Yes, the format is awesome right now.
Yeah, so they posted a deck dump, was it last week? Or was it earlier this week? I don't know anymore. Time is very illusory.
They had one earlier this week. They had one late last week, did they not?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
So they had one earlier this week that was 51 deck lists, which is an insane number. Even with their restrictions on how many deck lists get published based on, they have to be different enough to each other. 51 lists got published. And then we had one just today, October 11th, which was 41 lists.
And then we had the first one, which was already 26 lists, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So, oh my god, there's so many decks.
There are, yeah, I am way behind on looking at these decks. Holt has had a look at them, and I've semi-skimmed them.
For once, I'm the informed one,
but
if you can believe it. If I'm not funny, at least I'm informed slightly.
Oh man, I don't have either of those things. But, yeah, this is a way more deck lists than we've seen in Standard recently. And I think it's interesting because I think that a lot of it can be chalked up to where the power levels are concentrated, in that they're not really generally concentrated into any one card.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few cards that still stick out as very powerful. Teferi is one of those big ones.
Yeah.
Rekindling Phoenix is another big one. But there's a lot of cards that I think are more about how are you going to make this, a good card in your strategy?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, actually, is I think, actually, they're, in any format in Magic, there are certain cards that are just good. They're just very powerful, they're head and shoulders against most of the stuff, and it's worthwhile to do that strategy. What feels really different about this standard, though, is that it's really not clear what strategy they're best in. It's not like last standard where we had a whole cluster of really powerful cards and only a couple combination of those all together.
Yeah.
Like the green deck or the red deck. You know what I mean? Now it's kind of okay, well, we've got one powerful card. How do we use it? And
I mean, I also think that the power level's a bit flatter. So we don't have any cards like Hazaret or Gideon. Or we don't have that many of those cards where you think, oh, well, this card is so much more powerful than the rest of my deck.
Mm-hmm.
In a way that's overwhelming. And it's oh, well, they drew two of their Gideons, so I lost. Because I answered one and the other one killed me.
Oh, God. I remember going to GP Barcelona in a time where Mardu Ballista had just become a thing.
Yeah.
Gideon, obviously, was a 4-of in that deck, and you're running, Unlicensed Disintegration, Veteran Motorist, really, really fun deck. This is also around the same time as, the Sahelia combo. when that was still legal.
Yeah.
And God, it was like terrible because the mirror match was just like, who drew more Gideons?
Yeah, because that card was significantly more powerful than anything else the deck was doing.
Yeah, if you just didn't lose in the first 3 turns, then it literally kind of didn't matter what any of your other cards were.
Yeah.
It was just like, who drew more Gideons? And then second to that, who drew more unlicensed disintegrations?
Yeah.
And I feel like that isn't what Standard's like now.
Yeah, Standard, a lot of the cards are a lot flatter in power level, so you're able to like play a game against your opponent who drew a powerful card because you have your own powerful cards that are different, and your deck is a lot more like universally powerful rather than like, no, it's this card. This is the busted one.
That being said, while having a flat power level Standard is really fun, at least I find it, like that means there's a ton more variance in what you might encounter naturally. Yeah. Your choices for your deck and the ways you try to optimize and build will be different because you can't just build around like, okay, I've maxed out these 3 cards.
Yeah.
That doesn't leave a lot of room for anything else. They all work in one way together. Now, as we're going to talk about today, I think the format's more about, okay, I've got this one card that is very powerful. How do I want to optimize it?
Or it's almost just about like, okay, so I've got these like powerful payoffs. How do I enable them? Or I've got this powerful strategy that is enabled by like all these cards.
Mm-hmm.
What do I use to tie it together? Kind of thing. And also just like, how am I positioning myself against the other strategies and the other payoffs and decks and cards that are in the format?
Exactly. And basically when the decks are kind of not as pinned down, basically metagaming becomes really important and a lot more complex and difficult.
I mean, I think that's interesting because obviously like looking at formats like Modern or Legacy, people would often claim, and in my opinion rightfully so, that metagaming was not important.
Mm-hmm.
Because the metagame was so wide that it was impossible to know what anyone would be doing at any given time. I don't think the Standard is like that necessarily. I do think it's very wide and people will do a lot of things. But I think that the unifying thing here is that the differences between the different decks are still smaller than they are in Modern and Legacy, because there are some number of cards that you will see across them or that kind of unify their concepts.
Mm-hmm.
So what we actually want to talk about today is kind of the various like pillars, I guess, of Standard as we see them.
I think it's important to clarify is that usually, at least in most formats I've experienced and played, usually what I'd regard as the pillars of a format were the big decks. And that's kind of not exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah,
today.
I think that the pillars that we're going to talk about are go into multiple decks. But those decks often share a kind of unified idea of what they're doing, but they'll just approach it in different ways. And it can change their matchups and how you should be playing against them. And so we just kind of want to talk about the pillars as we see them, and how you kind of want to try and attack those pillars.
Mm-hmm.
And so how you need to be setting yourself up depending on where your kind of strategy ends up weaker, and how you can kind of shore those up, and just generally how you should start approaching metagaming in this new environment.
Exactly. It's interesting to see how fast information has changed, or how fast the decks have kind of gone up or gone down just in the last 3 deck dumps. And I think it's worthwhile to try and start mapping trends early and see where to go from there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So the first like major pillar that I want to talk about, that I think will come as a surprise to no one, because he's stuck around and been a pillar for a while, and that's the main pillar that I think we have retained over since the rotation, which is Teferi.
My boy, I love this boy. He's so good. I owe him so much.
I don't think we've really seen a true control deck that isn't playing Teferi.
Yeah, I could agree with that. There has been... So, okay. I think it's worthwhile to also say as sort of a disclaimer, is that since we've had over 100 decks dumped in basically the last week, 2 weeks...
Yeah, we have not looked in depth at all of them.
Well, I was also going to say there's also like really weirdo decks.
That's true.
Like really decks that where you're just like, I have a hard time believing that's right. Like, you
That's true.
5-0'd with it, whatever.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I have seen a couple red-blue lists that are just like, we're in on Ral.
Sure.
But I think that relates to a pillar we're going to talk about later.
A little bit, yeah.
In general, Teferi is the go-to control.
Yeah, he's definitely the majority of the control decks you will encounter are playing Teferi, generally alongside some mixture of Sinister Sabotage or Ionize, some mixture of either Steam Vents or Watery Graves.
They're probably going to either have Settle the Wreckage or Ionize. Sometimes.
Yeah.
Or not Ionize, sorry. Deafening Clarion.
Deafening Clarion, yes.
But
they
sometimes
all,
both.
Sometimes Ritual of Soot as well. The main things I have seen is like there's Jeskai lists that are base blue-red and splash the white. There's Jeskai lists that are kind of pure 3 colors.
Yes.
And actually go lighter on the blue in order to be able to play Settle the Wreckage.
And also other kind of removal options, things like Justice Strike and stuff like that.
Sure, yeah. And then there's the like Esper versions of Teferi, where people are playing Ritual of Soot and Vraska's Contempt, and it looks a lot more like what the blue-black splash white deck list did before.
That's what I was about to say. It feels closer to the kind of list that were refined near the end of last standard season.
Yeah. They don't have access to the Scarab God or Torrential Gearhulk anymore, so they're leaning a lot harder on Teferi. Some of them, in fact, most of the ones I've seen are playing like 1 Chromium in the main deck as a way of closing the game.
The only card that beat me in Constructed at Nationals.
Exactly. It must be amazing.
Terrible card. I hate it. Just joking. Chromium's actually pretty decent.
I think Chromium's quite good.
It's a pretty good win condition. It's hard to kill, and that's what Control wants.
Yeah. Generally, yeah. I think that's mostly the case. Yeah, I think that the Teferi deck. I've played against a lot of Teferi decks at this point. The guy's very popular. And he's still very powerful. He's definitely, if not the most powerful card in Standard, definitely among the kind of top 3, I think. I did a lot of things for those control decks. But I think that basically the way you beat Teferi decks hasn't changed since last Standard, and it really hasn't changed since they invented control decks. Which is that there's like a few ways of attacking them, or at least counterspell control decks. There's a few ways of attacking them. You can play a lot of cheap spells, such that their counterspells are not effective against what you're doing, because you're able to like always be resolving something, so you're always able to double spell, and they're not really good at stopping double spelling. You can play Hand Disruption, such that it's sort of similar to double spelling, but it puts them in difficult situations where they can't really make the right choice of what to counter.
Or like there's a perfect example of like you have a good read on your opponent, they've got Settle, they have 5 mana, you play Duress, and it's like, well, you can't counter it and play the Settle. I'm gonna get in for a big attack.
I've also found that Hand Disruption is quite effective. Just that I'll look at the hand and it's a bunch of counter spells and a Teferi, and I'm like, okay, take the Teferi.
What you gonna do now?
I feel very comfortable just trading resources with you. And then top decking better, because I have a bunch of Haymakers in my deck, and you have, 3 Teferis?
And also, like, in most conventional decks in this format, you've got counterspells as your, like, bread and butter cards. I've got creatures. Even if it's, like, a 3-2, it can still kill you.
Yeah. So the Teferi decks are pretty good at stabilizing, in my experience. Quite hard as well. Chemist's Insight is a really big get for the archetype.
Yeah, Chemist's Insight
because,
is sick.
Like, what it basically reads is, like, 4 mana, draw 2. One of those cards you drew, or, like, any of the cards you have can also be a 4 mana, draw 2 if you need it to be.
Yeah.
And the ability to turn, like, dead cards in the late game into 4 mana, draw 2 is, like, pretty great.
I mean, if anyone's played against Glimmer of Genius, like, during any of, like, the last 3 standard seasons, you know it's bad when on turn 4, you're kind of humming and hawing, and you're like, ooh, I think I just lose if this thing in my hand gets countered, and I think I can reasonably put you on a counterspell. I think I need to wait. And you go pass, and they're like, great, Glimmer. And you're like, okay, that's pretty bad. And then the next turn, they pass, and you're like, oh god, I'm still in the same position, and they're like, yeah, Glimmer. And you're like, oh, I am so 100% dead.
Yeah.
And
Insight does a very similar thing.
And it basically
but
just
it
lets
guarantees that they're going to draw a Glimmer if they want to, or they're going to draw another Insight if they want to.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think... Yeah, you can either... If you want to beat the Teferi decks, you can either play things like very aggressive red decks that play a lot of burn spells very quickly, such that the fact that your opponent doesn't really present a clock is kind of good for you because you have all the time in the world to deploy all your burn spells.
You get to go under them, basically.
And also you can resolve your things because you're playing more than one spell every turn.
I mean, the biggest thing about this, and the biggest way you lose to control decks when you are playing like this, is just be aware of how much you're committing. Be aware how much of you're extending into a Deafening Clarion or a Settle the Wreckage or whatever, because that's how they get you. They are able to win those games when they do, because they make up for it with the tempo of like, okay, I'm going to pay 4 mana, kill your first 3 turns. Yeah. Or whatever.
You can beat them with that approach. You can beat them by basically like hand attacking them or playing your own counter spells. Basically like sort of trying to play their same game against them. Or you can beat them by playing enormous nonsense cards that specifically say that a control player can never beat this.
Good old Carnage Tyrant.
Yeah, I mean, Carnage Tyrant is the exact example, and the one that's most playable, but Nezahal is another example, and stuff like that. Those sort of cards tend not to come out very often, and they tend to be in like sideboards and things like that. Even as I would count Argyl's Bloodfast as being a similar card to this, although that card has been put in a strange spot recently by the fact that all the Jeskai lists are running some number of expansion explosion. Mm-hmm. Like it makes it a lot less exciting to go down to like 6 life after drawing like 7 cards.
And some even run lightning strikes or other things that can go face. So yeah. And they're not as creatureless as they once were either. It's not like blue-white of Last Standard. May you rest in peace, where it was just like literally the only threat in my deck is Teferi.
They have more ways of punishing you for being, for going low on life. So Argyl's Bloodfast has been, it's still a house. It's just a little bit less unpunishable, I guess, from the control decks.
For sure.
So you can just play some of these like big one card, you can't touch this, I'm going to win the game things, which tend to be better against the the blue-red based Jeskai lists, and then get steadily worse as you get like closer to Settle the Wreckage and Cleansing Nova. Mm-hmm. The good news for those cards is generally that Settle the Wreckage and Cleansing Nova are kind of awkward to play right now.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say in all the deck dumps, there's always like a blue-white list or 2, and I think a lot of the reason for that is the strength of those 2 cards. But in general, it's not easy to do with Jeskai mana. When you're playing 3 colors, like, you are going to go more for the other effects that are wider and are easier to
it's nothing to do with Jeskai mana, and blue-white mana isn't exciting or very good. Mm-hmm. And you do give up like real things by not being red.
But when we get Hallowed Fountain...
I mean, maybe. But it also depends on how the format looks at that point. But yeah, I think I don't think we need to talk that much more about Teferi. People mostly know who he is, what he does, and how you're meant to fight him. The next big one, and I think that this is one of the biggest pillars to keep in mind when you're thinking about this format, is, in my opinion at least, Ravenous Chupacabra. Which is a card that kind of had a bit of a renaissance with the release of Guilds of Ravnica.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this card used to be awesome in Standard and saw a fair amount of play.
I don't think that's true.
No, I don't know. He went well with the Scarab God. He definitely had his plays for a bit.
He was very good for a long time.
That's what I'm saying, is back when he was first released, I
don't even think he was that good when he was first released. I think when he was first released, it was still incredibly important to exile the thing you killed. And he was still worse than Vraska's Contempt.
I mean, he still saw a fair amount of play and was part of those strategies of saying, I'm going to 2-for-1 you.
I actually still disagree with that. I don't think that is as true as
all right, Ravenous Chupacabra was always trash, and now it's
I don't think it was always trash, but I just don't think it was in lists. I know you're talking about it, but I think it was a 1 or 2 of at most, and it quickly fell out of favour because it didn't kill the things that were important in the format, like Rekindling Phoenix, Scarab God, or Hazaret.
Okay, so what do you think's different now, then?
I think what's different now is that Scarab God and Hazaret don't exist.
That's fair.
And Rekindling Phoenix is only playable in one deck. So, instead, people are playing stuff like Doom Whisperer, or Lyra, or Aurelia, and man, he's great against them.
Definitely.
And also that, a creature recursion-y green-black deck, which is the main place I would see him. I think you would expect to see him in this standard. Like that sort of deck has found like a lot of power, and so and that in Chupacabra is exactly the kind of strategy that it's looking for.
For sure. I mean, like, when you have tools like Findbroker, or even something like Eldest Reborn, and again, when it kills the relevant targets, like, being able to loop this back and forth is good. Like, Necrotal is a good card.
Yeah.
And Ravenous Chupacabra was not being played in 4-ofs, I agree, but there was a lot of hype around this card because it's quite powerful. It's a powerful effect.
I mean, like, Patrick Sullivan had, like, a big rant about it on an SCG coverage at one point, and everyone was like, oh, man, Chupacabra's going to be everywhere, and then it just really wasn't, because again the way the format was set up was such that like you just couldn't play this 4-mana 2/2 that didn't kill their best things. But now you do kill their best things.
And it feels so good. I'm not gonna lie, I've had a couple chances to resolve Chupacabras and loop them, and it's great. It's so good. And I think the strategy is airtight. Now the thing is, like, a lot of the details can be a bit funky around Chupacabra, so even in like green-black, like some decks are more in on Izoni, some decks are more into Vraska, and they're playing more of a classic rock deck.
Yeah, what I was gonna say basically is that like I almost put Overgrown Tomb on this list instead of Chupacabra, but we realized kind of late on that actually it was Chupacabra that was the centerpiece of this kind of strategy. But I would say that, yeah, like after Teferi, the biggest, or like one of the big strategies of Standard is like green-black.
I actually think it's bigger than Teferi.
I didn't mean like in terms of metagame share necessarily. I maybe misspoke. I meant just more like in order of what we're talking about.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I think that green-black strategies are really big right now, and I don't think that's really a very controversial thing to say. I think that a lot of them are predicated on the strength of Golgari Findbroker, but that they also vary a reasonable amount. And as you said, some of them are taking this much more creature-y angle, which Chupacabra goes very well with, because obviously you want creatures that do things in your deck that mostly has to play creatures.
Absolutely.
And they're playing some number of Izoni, and they're playing some number of maybe Molder Hulk.
Or there's like the Gruesome Menagerie, right? We talked about that before. And they're almost like this like engine that gets rolling, and suddenly there's just like so much value. You've traded all these dinky creatures and gotten some value out of them, and eventually you just overwhelm your opponent.
Yeah, you just play like an Izoni, and they're like, oh my god, okay, wipe the board. And you're like, okay, cool. Memorial to Folly, back my Izoni. Play Izoni. And they're like, okay, oh my god, okay, wipe the board. And then they're like, okay, cool. Play Find.
Yeah.
Get like 2 Izonis. And you're like, I can't beat 2 Izonis. Okay, that's it. That's something of my experience of playing against them.
I was about to say, this sounds like a horror story of yours. Personal experience here.
Yeah, I mean, so they tend to have an edge in the mirror against the more traditionally kind of like just straight rock green-black deck, which tends to play Vraska Relic Seeker as its top end, plays more spells because they can afford to, because they're not playing things that necessarily care about how many creatures are in their graveyard.
You have Assassin's Trophy, you've got Cast Down, you have some other tools. Some of them are running Deadweight.
Well, you also, I mean, most of them are running Deadweight somewhere in the 75, normally the sideboard, but like you see in various places. But you're also able to play like Vivian Reed in addition to the Eldritch Reborn in your 5 slot, because she's actually quite good, because finding Chupacabras is great, and killing Eldritch Reborns, or like white enchantment-based removal, or search for us counters is all like very relevant and nice to have access to. All these lists are also playing stuff like Plaguecrafter.
Yeah, Plaguecrafter's been a really big breakout.
Yeah.
I think it's so awesome they basically printed a Fleshbag Marauder that does something against control.
Yeah.
Which
especially
is
because control basically always plays Planeswalkers now.
Yeah.
So having cheap Planeswalker removal is also quite nice.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because like Planeswalker Edicts are specifically quite powerful, because you're so unlikely, if you're these creatureless control decks, so unlikely that it's not just destroy your Planeswalker. And I don't know, the Edicts being able to hit Planeswalkers is a really nice move from a design perspective, and I'm really happy they made.
I agree with that as well. I think that card is like such a cool thing, and I think is a reasonable part of this deck finding success and having some game against control, where I think traditionally that's a strategy that it's a bit harder to fight.
So my experience playing green-black has actually been that your game against control is pretty reasonable. So the Izoni variants I think are a bit weaker to control, and then the mid-range variants I think are a bit stronger, because you have access to a really quite hefty sideboard, because you get to bring in all your Duresses and Uncle's Bloodfast, which I know we talked about being slightly less impressive than it has been in the past, but I still think it's very good. And you basically just get to start force through haymakers, and a lot of your cards just like are really hard to beat if they resolve.
I think it's also a case as well, with especially with like some of the more dinky creatures. Even the rock decks are playing some weird 2 and 3 drops that are like, they're not that strong, so you don't want to use a counter on them, but they do grind advantage somehow. They'll either replace themselves by cantripping, or they'll scry you to a new thing through the explore mechanic, or whatever it is. All this stuff is kind of like, I don't really want to spend a counter spell on this, because they could just play like, I don't know, Vraska of some variety. But I also really don't want this to resolve. Like, you're
all their creatures do something when they enter the battlefield, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And even if that thing is just scrying and leaving a good card on top, or just like milling a couple cards into the graveyard, which is relevant with stuff like Finebroker and Eldest Reborn, they all do a cool thing. And they're all kind of rubbish in play, but that's okay, because they've all done something on the ETB. So like, yeah, I found that my game against control is pretty reasonable playing these green-black mid-range lists, but it gets worse the more like heavy on a Zoni you go, basically.
So if your game's good against control, how do you beat the Ravenous Chupacabra decks? How do you beat these big?
I mean, I think the games. Zoni crushes them.
Yeah,
like really hard.
Okay.
And I think that you struggle against the Selesnya tokens lists as well, the ones that are playing stuff like March of the Multitudes.
Right, so go wide strategy is a bit hard when you're trying to point Assassin's trophies down at the battlefield.
Yeah, there aren't really things you can play main deck that are high quality enough to actually justify playing main deck that deal with the wide boards.
I mean, there's like Ritual of Soot. There's also Fine Finality.
Yeah, so they do have access to stuff like Fine Finality, but Fine Finality can be quite slow.
Yeah,
it means you have game against these like going wide decks, but the Azoni decks specifically keep recurring Azoni, so you're just kind of like, all right, I don't have that many finalities.
Yeah, for sure.
And the Selesnya decks can often like not get out of the range of finality. Finality is actually a really good card against them, but just like present a very fast clock such that 6 mana is a lot for a board wipe.
Mm-hmm.
I think that basically the rock decks you can beat them with control. Like I said, I think my game against control is reasonable. I don't think it's like, oh, I'm super favored when I play the rock deck. I just think it's like, oh, this is a real game. Like, if I play this smart, I think I can win.
Mm-hmm.
And if my opponent plays it really smart, and we're both playing it smart, then I think it's like close.
Okay.
So I think that, and I think you can build your control list to be better against them. And I think you can build your rock list to be better against control.
Of course, you can always twist the knobs a little bit.
So there's a huge amount of tweaking you can do. And then I also think, like I say, that just wide board strategies tend to beat up on them a little bit, even with access to Fine Finality. Their main deck options against stuff like March of the Multitudes or Izoni is really quite poor. And then you have to like go into your sideboard for these like Golden Demises and stuff like that.
Like, you don't want to play Mephitic Vapors?
I do not want to play Mephitic Vapors when...
It'd be so sick.
I could either play Plague Mare or Golden Demise, and either one of them is better than Mephitic Vapors.
But you don't get the Surveil, man.
That's true, you're right. But I could recur a Plague Mare with my Golgari Finebroker.
That's pretty sick. I like that.
Or like my Eldest Reborn.
I guess the thing is, though, like...
Or my Muldrotha.
I guess this is a good time to like transition into talking about the March of the Multitudes deck.
Yeah.
Which I think is another pillar of the format.
I mean, the card has definitely been a lot more impressive than some people were expecting. Some people definitely called this one as being very, very good, but I think some people were like... I certainly was more like, maybe? I don't know how to rate Convoke cards.
I was pretty excited about it.
How expensive should I expect them to be?
I think that is a tough thing, to be fair, and I think evaluating Convoke is hard, but I was pretty stoked about it. But, March of the Multitude...
You were stoked?
I was stoked.
About a Convoke card?
Yeah, I was stoked to Convoke.
Would you say that your flames were in some way heightened?
Yeah, absolutely. Portling Outburst into Stoke the Flames.
Oh god, that was good.
That was a good time.
Unfortunately,
that time is not now.
No, now it's History Benalia into March of the Multitudes.
Yeah,
or History Benalia into Venerated Loxodon, who is also a big part of these strategies.
Absolutely. So, as you can tell from what we're talking about the Selesnya decks that are all about going wide, getting value from your creatures, or making more than one creatures with your cards, and then eventually spitting out a board that is just basically unbeatable. Instead, March of the Multitudes for a ton. You've got Tristani Ascendant, or whatever it is.
Tristani Discordant.
Discordant, that's what it is.
Because she's sad, because Nico Bolas is going to come and mess everyone up. I think.
Poor Tristani.
I don't know the lore.
I don't know. I'm not up to date, to be honest. But, all these creatures kind of make more creatures, make your creatures bigger, and then finally you go, okay, March the Multitudes for 8.
I've definitely had, stalled out boards where I've been playing Rock, and my opponent's playing Green-White, and I've kind of got it down to, I'm like, okay, I think I can win in the next couple turns. I just need to, untap and do this, and okay, cool, I got my plan. I pass the turn, and my opponent, and I'm like, I can win as long as they don't have March of the Multitudes. And they just, March of the Multitudes me for 9, and they have a Trostani in play, and I'm like, oh, I'm just actually dead. There is no possible way for me to block enough of this damage, and they're going to gain, 20 life.
For sure.
So, the decks have been, really good at going over the top of mid-range decks, in my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And also very strong at beating up, aggressive decks.
And in the playtesting we've done, which hasn't been tons, I found it to be very poor against control.
Yeah.
Really, really hard to get ahead in the first 3 turns of the game.
All of the control decks we talked about play sweepers, because you have to, basically. And Ritual of Soot, pretty good when all your creatures that matter are, 0 mana. I guess you get to leave behind the Loxodon and the Tristani, but honestly, if you're at a point where you're resolving Loxodons and Tristanis against control, then you're probably winning. Which is kind of how you beat them, right? You do have games where you do that and you win, but a lot of times what will happen is the control deck will counter your creatures that matter and then sweep up all your tokens that didn't, and then you'll kind of be left with nothing. And stuff like March of the Multitudes is quite poor against control in some ways. Unless you're fireballing them, they're going to sweep your board, and then, it made me overcommit almost.
Yeah, I think the thing that's really difficult as well is so I consider the March decks to not just the reason they're mid-range killers is because they snowball. They snowball a ton. Every creature they play potentially is another mana piece. Is potentially a lethal threat, and they go super wide. They tax your resources a ton. Well, Control has come equipped with the resources that you need to beat that. They go, okay, if you make some small dudes, kill them before you ever get to tap them for Convoke, or counter your History of Benalia.
Yeah.
Or again, if you do manage to commit something to board, be like, well, I guess I'll just Wrath of God.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's really tough to get ahead. And I'd say, if you have a lot of March of the Multitudes in your meta, just play Teferi. And I feel like you'll be very, very favored. At least in my experience so far.
Yeah, I think that lines up with my experience as well.
I think the hardest part for the Multitudes deck is, there's just not a lot of sideboard stuff. There's that enchantment that, whenever you gain life, you draw a card.
Yeah, Dawn of Hope.
Yeah, that's sort of interesting and kind of does a weird Argos Bloodfast. Not nearly the same, but kind of in the same route where it's something cheap where you can grind advantage out of it. But
yeah, it gives you something to do with your mana it means basically once the control deck has established oh, okay, we're both you've run out of resources, you can be well, no, I'm never going to run out of resources while this card is in play.
Yeah, I think it's just really hard for them to have something that's super, super impactful from the sideboard in those colors that's great against control.
Yeah, we lost, what was the name of it? The Pokedex.
Lifecrafter's Bestiary.
Yeah, Lifecrafter's Bestiary. We lost that card, which was the big, green equivalent to Argos Bloodfast that let you just kind of beat control decks consistently.
Mm-hmm.
You still have stuff like Shaper's Sanctuary, but I think that card is not as good as it used to be against, because of the blue-black based control decks that are reliant on cheap removal spells, and then still targeted removal spells. Because those decks have now access to stuff like Ritual of Soot,
and
because they just aren't the only control decks in town. We have these like Deafening Clarion decks as well. It just makes that card a little bit less good than it has been. It's still probably worth including in your white side, in your green sideboard, but not always.
I think the other thing that's super important to try and shore up these big control matchups, and might be a big reason why a lot of them are also playing Ral as well with Teferi, is just pack Sorcerous Spyglasses.
Yeah.
Like, if you land that on turn 2, just shout Teferi to the heavens, and there are games where you'll just win. Like, eventually you'll play enough things, they'll run out of resources, and you'll be able to say, well, you can't win with Teferi, so I win.
Yeah.
And
obviously, like, the way they're going to fight that is Chemis's Insight, but Chemis's Insight is so much less of a powerful card advantage engine than Teferi is.
Yeah, for sure. And again, they still do have to win the game, as it were. And, a lot of the decks just have Teferi as their main thing. Sideboard, I'm sure they have tools like Lyra or other things that they might be interested in. So it might not work every time, but this is the thing, is I think that's kind of the best you got.
Yeah. I do think that like Spyglass is a solid thing to be doing. I think there's just like quite a lot of targets in actually quite a few of these decks that we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that alongside March of the Multitudes, which is sort of the most aggressive style of deck we've talked about, the other like major aggressive pillar is Experimental Frenzy.
Yeah, this card is good.
Yeah,
this card is really, really good. If you ever doubted it before, have no doubt in your mind.
Yeah,
strong.
The card's just great. The reason why the red decks aren't insane is because none of the other ones are. None of the other cards in the red decks are great. They're all like really medium.
They're fine. They're serviceable. And that's the thing. It's hard to make a really good...
I think some of them are kind of actively bad, but they're still the best you've got.
Yeah.
Stuff like Viashino Pyromancer is like, oh, okay, this is the best wizard we have?
Yeah.
Okay. In my opinion, the red decks are like Runaway Steamkin, Goblin Chain Whirler, Experimental Frenzy, and there was one other good card in my head, but I've forgotten what it was. Is
it the burn card? The sick browbeat with flashback?
Only semi. I think that having played with that card, I still think it's less good than some people are really hyping it up to be. But it's obviously playable. It is good. You don't have to take it out of your red decks, but I don't think it's like...
We're talking about risk factor here, in case you don't know the card.
I've forgotten. Oh, Phoenix. Rekindling Phoenix. It's
like
Rekindling Phoenix, Experimental Frenzy, Chain Whirler, Steamkin are like the good cards in your red deck, and then like people are sort of, and you have to play stuff like G2 Lava Runner and Viashino Pyromancer and like Fanatical Firebrand to just fill out the slots. As like things that do damage,
which is never really a place you want to be in constructed. Like, I feel like this is the thing. I think Experimental Frenzy is pretty bonkers.
Yeah,
and I think actually it's quite important that your deck have some sort of answer or way to interact with that enchantment.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true.
Because sometimes you'll just get wrecked by it.
Yeah.
But I would agree that I feel like for the deck to be absolutely bonkers, it needs a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it hasn't just been like dominating stuff is kind of indicative of that, even with a card as insane as Experimental Frenzy for these red aggressive archetypes. I also think, so I think that there are like three main things you have going for playing these Experimental Frenzy decks. One is that you get to play Experimental Frenzy, which is a very, very good card. One is that you get to play a style of deck that has been a little bit absent, I think, from Standard recently, and people are going to be like, what? When I say it, but I think you get to play Burn, which is different to the red decks we've had in the past, which were very creature-based, for the most part. But you get to play like a Burn deck in Standard, which attacks on certain angles and, allows you to really beat up on like no clock control decks.
Yes.
And really just like try and kill people as fast as possible get to ignore their game plan to some degree, which is a powerful thing to be able to do. So I think that like you get the fact that you get to play this like burn angle is a real reason to play it, and then the other reason to play it is that you get to play some cards that were very powerful and very everywhere last Standard format, and that have now. Basically, it's become impossible to play them anywhere else. And those cards are like Goblin Chain Whirler and Rekindling Phoenix.
Yeah, I think this deck, like, having access to tools like that does make it be able to have legs, as it were, and be able to stand up to some of the other archetypes where I think that traditionally this deck would be very bad, like the March of the Multitudes deck. Yeah. I still don't think it's a great matchup. I imagine you have a bunch of lifelinkers in that deck, and you're able to make a lot of blockers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of it comes down to... I haven't played enough of it to know, but it feels weird, because I think it comes down to, like, who's on the play. Does the green-white player get their Venerated Loxodon down first? Or does the Chain Whirler player get their Chain Whirler down first? Because those cards are the ones that feel like they beat the other person's strategy. Like, the best. I will say that I think actually the most exciting card of the ones I listed, of the two that I listed there, is actually Rekindling Phoenix. You know how we were talking about how you beat the green-black decks? I think that card on its own is one of the ways you beat the green-black decks.
Yeah, I feel that.
We were talking about Ravenous Chupacabra and, like, how good it is right now and how it kills everything. Well, there is one important creature it does not kill, and that's Rekindling Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
And that card is actually just really hard to kill right now, I think. Because a lot of the exile-based removal has just stopped being as good. Like, Seal Away has disappeared.
I was going to say, you have, like, Conclave Tribunal, which is a thing.
That's true. But it's also very specific, generally. It's, like, just in the March of the Multitudes decks.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else is really playing it.
Sometimes you get it in these Boros decks or the white decks, but it depends. And that's another thing we're going to move on to in a bit. But like,
basically, I don't think it's unkillable. I just think it's
hard to kill.
Yeah, and that's what matters. And it's better than it... It's almost weirdly better than it has been, but harder to play than it has been before. So, like... Because you can't really play it in your Boros deck if you want to play History of Benalia. Because the mana just isn't quite good enough to support, like... In your aggro deck, you can't play enough lands to go, like, white into red on turn... from turn 3 to turn 4.
Yeah. So,
you generally want to be playing History of Benalia in those decks because it's slightly better for them. But then Rekindling Phoenix is just this very strong card that beats up on the green-black decks. And, like, some of the blue-red base control decks struggle with it once it resolves.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, I mean, even Esper can struggle because they have to Vraska's Contempt it.
Yeah, for sure. Or do, like, some other type of shenanigan that they don't want to do, like tucking with Teferi or something.
Yeah.
Like that.
Basically, anything where I'm forcing my opponent to tuck with Teferi is, like...
Great.
A good... That's my measure. I guess that's maybe my measure of a good threat in Standard. It's something where my opponent has to just, like, play their Teferi and tuck my thing, and then I can be like, okay, cool. Kill your Teferi, you're tapped out, do another thing. Mm-hmm. And that's where you start to snowball games against control and Teferi decks in general. But yeah, I think having access to Rekindling Phoenix is a huge thing for these decks. It also beats up really hard on, like, the Azoni green-black decks. And it's also just one of the ways that you beat the March of the Multitudes guys, because, like, they're making all these lifelinkers, and you're like, okay. Well, they make a bunch of tokens, not even lifelinking tokens, just tokens, and you're like, alright, do you have anything that flies?
Mm-hmm.
No? Alright. Kill you in the air. It's easier for them to deal with it, but basically I found white to not be a huge primary colour in this format. Or when it is, it's like, there's a few decks that are, like, white primarily.
Yeah.
But most decks are not really touching it, or if they are, it's for, like, a few cards, and very few in exile.
And we have this actually as one of the pillars of the format, but I think this is, like, the small pillar. This is, like, more of an acknowledgement to a lot of hot nonsense that's running around. And basically, the pillar that represents these white decks is just History of Benalia.
Yeah.
And, like, that card is in the March of the Multitudes deck, but we kind of want to distinguish between that strategy and some of the other ones. Like, there's a mono white deck that's flying around, and it always seems to end up in the deck dump.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's the same person playing it, but it's like, the 12 or 16 one-drop list that's playing History of Benalia. Or this is also, like, your Boros variants. Pretty much all of them have History of Benalia alongside. Most of them have gone bigger as well. They're, like, playing Aurelia.
Yeah.
And not playing Tajik or too many 2-drops, if that makes sense. They're kind of like leaning harder in the Angels sector, or they're playing like Deafening Clarion Main or whatever. There's one Boros deck that is in this deck dump, I think, that's kind of that ilk, but it's not playing Deafening Clarion. It's just like, it's playing stuff like Siege Gang Commander and like Legion Warboss, so it's a bit more creature based.
Sure,
but
I can believe that being good.
The 4 History of Benalia are always there though, so like, That's how they grind their advantage. That's basically the big power card that I think they're hinging on. And I think a lot of the reason is exactly what you're saying about Chupacabra, or a lot of the removal is like, it's really hard to kill history.
Yeah.
It's pretty much always a 2-for-1. And that's just so important to these decks to be able to have that tool, this thing ticking down that also can represent a lot of reach as well.
Yeah, it can represent like 10 damage over the course of its chapters, and then also you get to keep 2/2/2s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that pretty much like Experimental Frenzy, History of an Earlier, March of the Multitudes covers like most of the aggressive options available. I mean, and some of the Boros decks are playing Experimental Frenzy, but it's harder to play if you're like going bigger, basically.
Yeah, I think it's also like you need some way to be able to continuously generate the mana, so you got to play Steam Ken.
And you don't necessarily need to do that. You just kind of like need to be able to be playing cheap spells.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you play Experimental Frenzy and then you like see an Aurelia on top of your deck, and
It
you're
gets
like,
real awkward.
You're like, oh, I can't cast that right now. I guess I'll draw it. Okay, there's another 4-drop. I'll play that. Okay, it's less like, it's more like Advances Blasting Cannons that made you discard your hand in those decks.
Yeah.
And less like an insane like card drawing engine.
I was about to say, spoilers, that's not very good.
Yeah. Whereas it is great in Mono Red where you're just like, okay, cool. Cast every card off the top of my deck. I cast 3 cards this turn, I'm going to cast 4 next turn.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Also, you just have to play more lands to play these like 4-drops in the numbers you're looking to. Which makes it more likely you end up in the kind of bad scenario with Frenzy where you have like a run of lands on top of your deck. That said, people overstate this. Frenzy is good in that scenario because it means you're not just drawing lands for 4 turns.
Yes.
Like, I've seen people be like, oh, but what if there's like 4 lands on top of my deck? Then Frenzy's terrible. It's like, well, no, if there were 4 lands on top of your deck, you were going to lose anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Frenzy means that you get past that in like 2 turns rather than 4.
4. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that there's a couple of other major pillars that we were looking at. I guess I want to talk about the one that I think is a bit older before we talk about the one that's a bit newer.
Okay.
The one that's a bit older is Vraska's Contempt, which is an odd card to have on the list alongside Ravenous Chupacabra. But I think that there are like 2 main black strategies right now from what I can see.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Ravenous Chupacabra strategies, which tend to be green-black and tend to be a bit more creature-focused and a bit more mid-rangey haymakery.
Or trading value with small creatures.
Yeah, well, they tend to be a bit more creature-focused, and they tend to be a bit more like creature mid-range. And then there's these Vraska's Contempt black decks, which tend to be blue-black and tend to be more about like spells mid-range, and then finishing the game with some combination of Doom Whisperer, Dream Eater, and depending on how exciting you want to make your mana base that day, Nicol Bolas, Planeswalker, or not Planeswalker, the Ravager.
They're kind of closer, like, they're kind of in that weird space where it's like, is it control or is it like kind of like really big mid-range? You know what I mean? Because a lot of it is like, your removal suite, they will be running some sort of counter magic usually. They're not going to be running Sinister Sabotage, but they'll typically be running like Essence Scatters.
Yeah.
Or some number of negates.
I've seen Sinister Sabotage in these lists, incidentally. It's not unheard of. It's just not totally common. Because it's hard to find Sinister Sabotage and Notion Rain in the same list, and I've often seen Notion Rains in those lists.
Notion Rain's so good.
Notion Rain's quite good. It's not so good.
It's better Read the Bones.
It's alright. Yeah, but
Read the Bones was so good!
Read the Bones was okay. It was specifically good in the specific format it was in.
I think you are downplaying that card. That's a good effect.
Hey, okay, the card's okay. I just, like, I don't think that it's like... For example, I don't think it's like an incredible always 4 in these lists. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
It's not seeing the amount of play that Read the Bones do. It's like being better because it's like, the format's different.
I think I just have such a fondness now for Notion Rain after playing it. So I've been playing a lot of Limited.
Sure, and it's very good there.
Oh my god, it's so good going Dimir Spybug into Notion Rain. It's just the best.
Surely it's better to go Dimir Spybug into Whisper Agent.
I mean, actually, the
nuts...
like
5 power.
The nuts is to go... 2. Is it Night Veil Sprite? The one that when I attack...
I always call it Surveilling Sprite, but that's a different card.
Is it actually?
Yeah, I think it's like a 2-mana 1/1 flyer that when it dies, you draw a card.
Yeah, the actual business in Gilder Livnid is going Night Veil Sprite into Dimir Spybug.
Yeah.
And also
Stormcrow into Flying Man.
I mean, it's like a Suntail Hawk, right? But it gets a lot better, and it's...
I mean, it's like a Flying Man.
It's amazing.
It's blue.
It's amazing.
It flies into 1/1.
Whatever. It's amazing.
Yeah, those cards are pretty good together. And actually, some of these like blue-black mid-range decks we're talking about, I think there were some of them early on that were playing Spybug.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen any in the more recent.
No, I think that kind of Turbo Surveil, like aggro-y style disappeared, and we're mostly left with these kind of more defensively oriented, like I'm going to control the game up until about turn 4 or 5, and then I'm going to slam a Haymaker, and then you're going to like die to it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, like we had a lot of conversations when we were thinking about this archetype and how to think about it, and its neighboring archetypes, stuff like that kind of can splash green, like Sultai decks and stuff like that, and how to define it, and we were first like, oh, it's Nicol Bolas, but wait, there's so much blue-black. Oh, maybe it's like Doom Whisperer.
Yeah.
And then we're like, oh wait, it's just the Vraska's Contempt. Because all the other decks, like, mind you, these decks probably will run 1 or 2 Chupacabra, but they'll probably max out on the Contempt, because it's really important to exile and not have things recurring. Just
it's also important to kill, like, Planeswalkers.
Yeah, that too.
Like, otherwise this deck would be really cold to, like, a Resolve Vraska.
Yeah.
I mean, the deck is pretty cold to a Resolve Vraska anyway, but I will say that my experience playing against these is that they're okay against the control decks, but they're very good against the control decks because you're playing blue-black. So you get to play Counter Magic and Hand Disruption and big threats.
Mm-hmm.
So you just get to like beat up on them. Sometimes you're playing Disinformation Campaign just to really go all out and really make sure the control decks can never win a game.
You can win a game of Magic. You can also run other tools as well, like Kitesail Freebooter, that are like...
You can. I'm not sure I've seen that commonly. But...
There was a couple in this deck down, the most recent one where they were running Freebooter, which I like. I mean, that's a tried and tested strategy that was pretty good in last standard. Like, it was kind of like... I'd say it was probably tier 2, but it got like, more popular as the format.
The only time I remember people playing Freebooter in last standard was like Godfarer's Gift.
I've lost to a lot of blue-black mid-range last standard when I was playing Teferi's, and they were going turn 2... Game 1, Freebooter, and you're like, okay.
That is a cold shot in a standard dominated entirely by red-black. But, yeah. But no, I mean, like, yes, you can play these... It gets to play a lot of these, like, hateful permanents, in a way, against control. I do think you are very good against them. But I think it struggles a lot going up against stuff like the Ravenous Chupacabra lists, actually.
Yeah.
Because if all your threats... They don't actually 2-for-1. They sort of make your next draw very likely to be good by surveilling.
Yeah.
But they don't actually generate real advantage. But then all your opponent's stuff does. And then when you play Doom Whisperer and your opponent Chupacabras it, you're really behind.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, is like, it's kind of like what we were talking about with Rekindling Phoenix, where it's like, well, all my stuff just dies to being dead. Like,
yeah.
It all dies really easy, none of it is evasive, and, I mean, I guess with Doom Whisperer, you get to do a weird kind of tutor effect, but you pay a lot of life, and that's a real cost. I mean, it gets mitigated maybe a little bit with, like, things like Moment of Craving and Vraska's Contempt itself.
Yeah, there's a reason that a lot of these lists are playing Moment of Craving. It also makes them quite good against the aggro lists. If you're playing, like, if you get to go, like, Moment of Craving into Vraska's Contempt into Doom Whisperer, lol, you can never kill this red deck. And it will kill you very fast, which is a very important piece of like how you beat burn.
And I think there's a level where you can sort of game that a bit and run more things like the Eldest Reborn and stuff, where you're like, oh, if I really need to grind. A couple of them have like also, Search for Azcanta and Orgul's Bloodfast.
Yeah, main. And I mean also things like splashing for Nicol Bolas becomes very attractive in those scenarios because Nicol Bolas does go 2-for-1. Like, you play him, your opponent discards a card. Okay, you Chupacabra me? Alright, we're actually even, buddy.
Yeah.
I guess they have a 2-2, but...
Woo!
I can hopefully invalidate a 2-2 in some way, and then, like, that's fine.
I'm actually really interested to try this archetype. I haven't played it enough. I didn't play it last standard, and a lot of the people playing it, or I should say when I did see it played, I was like, I think this is... It has a lot of different effects. It has a lot of breadth. In terms of what it can play against and what it can play for. And I struggle to think that there's like a matchup where it's extremely heavily unfavored But I also struggle to think, like, besides control, what matchups it's extremely favored in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that. So I haven't really played that much of these Grixis lists, but they don't seem like they handle go wide decks. They seem like they handle them about as well as Green Black does, which is to say, not very well.
Well, I think they've got more tools in the way of like ritual set and stuff like that.
It depends how many of them they're playing main.
Yeah, and again, this is all like. So I feel like I've said this so many times during this podcast already. Like, it depends how much you want. It depends how much you want. Like, the decks archetypes in this standard have so much depth, and what I mean by that is you can really configure these decks to prey upon the decks you want to do it, and that's why metagaming is. I feel like is like you brought up the point about modern, where it's like, oh well, metagaming is sort of impossible. It's so broad, but it's like here, it's like but I can play the same deck. But tweak it to be more favored about what I think there's going to be more of.
And it's also that, like,
7
it is also in order to tweak your deck in this standard format to be better against a certain archetype, we're talking about, like, moving some cards around on the sideboard that are, like, slightly better against some things than others, but not, like... Basically, in Modern, it's like, oh, do I want to be able to beat Affinity? Okay, well, I need, like, 3 Stony Silence in my sideboard to consistently beat Affinity. Okay, but that's, like, a fifth of my sideboard real estate. Given over to one deck.
Yeah.
And the decks are so powerfully linear at doing what they're trying to do, and what they're trying to do gets hated on by such specific things, that it's very hard to have, like, things that catch multiple angles.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, Deathgorge Scavenger is quite a good card against the Azoni graveyard decks. But it's also quite a good card against Mono Red.
Yep.
So you can kind of cover your 2 bases there.
Yeah, you have more breadth.
Yeah. And there's just more ability to do that in Standard because the cards are less like targeted hate pieces and commonly more like, oh, okay.
And also you don't have to play against like literally 50 different archetypes that exist in Modern or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So many decks. Whereas here, like, we're talking about like maybe only 5 or 6 archetypes, but them having a lot of depth and having a lot of variance between the same archetype.
Yeah, and kind of ways you can build them and ways you can take them forward. Like I say, I still think that I actually haven't been very impressed by these Grixis/Blue Black decks. I think that being Grixis is probably better because I think that Nicol Bolas is a really strong option to have access to. Otherwise, I have found that their ways of winning the game are quite limited, actually. And that, especially if you're playing like a strategy that can go long against them, then they just actually kind of struggle if you're not like a counterspell-based control deck.
I believe that.
Again, like Ravenous Chupacabra is just a really good card against them. And also, like, while I talked about them being good against the aggro decks, you might notice that these decks basically can't remove a resolved Experimental Frenzy.
Yeah,
They can bounce them with, like, Dream Eater.
You have to do so much work to get rid of Experimental Frenzy, and I think that actually is almost... I won't say a nail in the coffin just because, like we were saying, like, the Experimental Frenzy decks, like... The card seems busted, but it feels like their power isn't as equal amongst their cards in general.
Yeah.
And it feels like the shell, like, there are some cards that are definitely just weaker. But if that shell ever gets strong, it's like, okay, I have to play something that I need to be able to remove Experimental Frenzy. And obviously that's not in Grixis' Color Pie or Blue Blacks.
Yeah. Removing Resolved Enchantments is just not something that Grixis colors are really able to do. And is actually one of the bigger draws to being a green-black deck.
Mm-hmm.
Because you get to have Assassin's Trophy, which means that you can kill Teferi, or Experimental Frenzy, or Steel Leaf Champion, all with the same card.
Or you could just take the best of both worlds and play Sultai.
Yeah, I've actually been working on a Sultai list recently, with the concept being that everything that matters in the green-black mirror costs 4 or more, so why don't I play Disdainful Stroke? Because that card's just really good in the green-black mirror. All of them cost 4 or more, all of them do something when they enter the battlefield, and be able to counter one and then it'll slam one of my own seems insane. Also, I'm not sure, but I feel like Muldrotha probably crushes the mirror.
Muldrotha? Really?
Yeah.
Okay, you have to show me this list.
Okay.
I'm down for this. I mean, Muldrotha feels a little bit ridiculous. I don't think I've ever seen her at a table that wasn't, like, EDH.
I mean, people have been talking about it before. I have one in the list I put together, just to try and...
Isn't it her? I don't know.
It is a her. I'm sorry. I get confused because it's a big tentacle swamp
I was
monster.
about to say, I'm not
But
even
it is
sure
a
it's...
her. The flavor text says, my daughter, something,
Right.
Multani Yavimai's avatar. And Muldrotha is meant to be Multani's daughter. So yeah, it is a her. But, I don't really that's not really the focus of the list. It's just like, I don't know, if you ever get to cast an Eldest Reborn off of it, then... I did in one game get to cast a Golgari Finebroker, getting back a Golgari Finebroker from my Muldrotha.
That seems really good.
That
seems real good.
It was, it was, I couldn't tell, but it was good. Most of it is like pretty, the actual Blue Splash is very light. It's for like Thought Erasures, Negates, Disdainful Strokes, and I think I was playing a couple Notion Rains, but that card hasn't been very impressive.
That also sounds like it really shores up your control matchup.
That's the concept, basically, that you beat up on the mirror and your control matchup becomes a lot better.
Cool.
Because you get access to main deck discard spells and counter spells from the sideboard. I felt like my aggro matchup would get a lot worse, so I put in like an additional Wild Growth Walker in the sideboard, and I think another Golden Demise.
Mm-hmm.
Just like more stuff that lets me beat aggro decks and not die to them.
For sure.
I'm also playing a couple more Explore creatures than I have been previously, because I want the Wild Growth Walkers to actually be good from the sideboard.
There's also something about, like, you're playing 3 colors, you want your colors of land as well. Like,
That's true.
Having land drops is a real thing, and the deck wants to do that. So
That's definitely true. And I mean, like, it's not unreasonable for me to be playing the number. I'm playing like 10 Explore creatures, which is not a number that's unheard of from like regular just green-black lists.
for sure.
I do think that Sultai actually has real
Legs.
Yeah, I think it has real legs.
I'm really excited to see. Yeah, I was about to say, I'm really excited to see how that testing goes. There is, however, one last
one more pillar. Which you were talking about ways to beat the green-black decks. I think this deck might just crush the green-black decks.
Oh yeah.
This guy's Crackling Drake. There's been quite a large number of Crackling Drake-based decks that have succeeded in some way. Did it come second in the PTQ, or just make top 8? Something made top 8 in the PTQ that was playing 8 creatures, 4 Crackling Drake, 4 Goblin Electromancer, and I still don't know how that deck wins any games of Magic.
It's so crazy. We were talking at the beginning of this format when we were looking at spoilers.
Yeah.
This is a card we were excited about.
I mean, I'm still excited by it. It's a very cool card.
And the thing is, like, so we eventually settled on Crackling Drake as the pillar card because there's like a lot of cards that are around it, like Niv Mizzet.
Yeah, Niv Mizzet's like a cool card that's been showing up. That guy's pretty unbeatable for a lot of decks.
Or Ral Zarek.
Yeah, that guy's also been showing up a lot.
But all of these lists, whatever the cards around it, like Goblin Electromancer, Enigma Drake, whatever, there's always the Crackling Drakes. And I actually, this deck I really, really want to try. I think it's really cool. And I haven't had a chance to sleeve it up yet. But this is my jam. Blue-red spells? I've played that before in a different format. Goblin Electromancer.
Oh, yeah,
I've
you
played
played
that in
Storm. That's a bit different to this.
It's basically a Storm. It's just your Grape Shot is a Crackling Drake.
I don't think that's true. But, yeah, I mean, Crackling Drake has had a lot more success than I expected. And I was quite high on him. I thought he was good, but he's definitely had a lot of success. Expansion Explosion has been a really cool card in this archetype. Alongside just like a lot of Jeskai lists are playing it. Because of the versatility of, like, I've had a lot of my Thought Erasures expansions.
Mm-hmm.
So then they're like, I thought these them, but they thought these me, and kind of ends up being awkward for both of us, but, like, I don't really feel like I came out of the exchange massively ahead. I've also just had a lot of, like, counterspells expansioned, or I've expansioned a lot of counterspells myself.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives you this, like, versatility where it's not a dead card and control mirrors, and then also, late game, it's just, like, draw 5, kill your thing.
So I think the hardest thing to nail down exactly about Crackling Drake is that this archetype has so much play in how you want to build it. Like, if you want Crackling Drake to be how you kill people, you can be, like, really controlling, and you can play a bunch of counterspells, and you can play your Chemister's Insights, and you can play Ionizes and stuff like that. And eventually you'll just play a X4. A lot of removal doesn't hit. Obviously, most of the black removal does.
Yeah.
But you can hold up a counterspell for it, and then you'll just hit them like 2 times for 9. And you got them.
I mean, like, in my experience of playing against these decks, actually it's less than 2 times. Because they're playing, they're playing multiple lightning strikes, and they're playing Ionizers.
Yep.
And Ionize has has real text in this deck. They're not just playing it because it's blue-red instead of blue-blue. They're playing it because it deals 2 to you. So, I actually think that's a real strategy, even without Crackling Drakes, of just, this kind of weird burn-focused, Expansion Explosion Jeskai deck, where you're just okay, I'm going to play 4 Lightning Strikes, I'm going to play 4 Ionizers, I'm going to play, 3 Expansion Explosions, I'm going to play 1 Banefire in my deck.
Yeah.
And then, I'm just going to do damage to you over the course of the game.
Incidental
damage. Chip damage, and then, you've got to, 9? Alright, kill you?
Yep. You can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I think that's a real interesting thing, and that's kind of what that in some ways is what these Cracking Drake lists are tapping into.
Yeah.
And they're playing stuff like Fight with Fire.
But again, you don't have to be I'm going to play 3 mana counterspells. You can be I'll play a bit of a mid-rangey deck where I'm going to run Essence Scatters, maybe some Shocks and Lightning Strikes because they're efficient, a couple Lava Coils, but then you're playing 4 Enigma Drake, 4 Crackling Drake, some Rekindling Phoenixes, some Rowls, where you're just yep, my top end is a lot of stuff that will kill you fast. And is either hard to kill, or you gotta kill it now, otherwise I'm gonna get some serious value out of this thing. And then finally there's the level where you're just kind of much lower to the ground, where you're yeah, I'm playing Crackling Drake, but I'm playing it alongside Arclight Phoenix.
Whew.
And I'm going to be Lightning Strike you, Shock you. I might have a couple card draw spells just to cycle. You're playing Charter Course because you expect to be attacking a lot.
Well, I mean, you're playing Charter Course because you're playing Arclight Phoenix.
Yeah, that too. It's strong.
I mean, I think that's the problem. Looking at the deck list that you've pulled up, they're playing Charter Course and Radical Idea because they specifically want to discard their Arclight Phoenix.
Yeah, that's fair. Value town.
There's no other ways to do that.
I mean, I think you're just fine playing it. The 3-2 haste. Flies.
That's not that good. You're playing it because you can bring it back from the graveyard.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying though. Is I don't think it's unreasonable to expect to cast it though in this list.
I don't think
and then bring it back afterwards.
I don't think it's unreasonable to cast it, but I think that you're playing these discard options. You're playing these options to discard it because you want to be able to discard it.
Yeah, I think it helps.
Especially with Goblin Electromancer. I think Plan A is discard my Arclight Phoenix in this list.
I mean, I haven't played the deck.
Looking at it, in general, if I'm putting Arclight Phoenix in my deck, my plan A is discard or mill it, then bring it back the first time, rather than paying full price.
For sure.
Because full price for a hasty, Snapping Drake is not that good and constructed.
I think it's fine if they have to spend a removal spell on it, and then you recur it. And then you recur it.
Sure, in that scenario, obviously it's okay. But if my opponent is play Goblin Shamewhirler, and I'm play a hasty Snapping Drake, and they're okay, risk factor you.
Mm-hmm.
Lightning Strike you, Wizards Lightning you, you're dead.
For sure.
That's my point, is I think that in a lot of scenarios you're planning to discard it to bring it back, not just cast it as a 4-drop.
The thing is,
there's a lot of 4-drops that are way better than a hasty Snapping Drake in the format.
For sure, but the thing is, I'm pretty happy about it with the way that board stalls go in this format, and the way that basically, if we're talking about these other threats where it's they can just kill, it's hey, at least it gets in for 3, for sure.
The fact that people aren't playing as much exile removal is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Around it. So I'm not saying that you will never cast it. I'm just saying that and I'm not. I would wager that you still plan to cast it a good amount of the time. I just think that plan A is discard this thing.
Either way, if you're playing against this deck, I think one of the biggest things you just have to be super aware of your life total, and you gotta really think about basically you gotta play ways to kill X4s. And this is I feel like a lot of these decks kind of abuse the decks that are I'm gonna play Ritual of Soot main deck. And you're play an X4, and they're
I mean, I think you mean a 4-cost creature there.
Yeah.
Because Ritual of Soot kills CMC3 things.
Yeah, for sure. But I'm just saying I have no other real threat. I'm just gonna throw burn spells at you and tell you okay, do you have a counter?
I will say that my pick of what's looking really good this week, or a card that I would play more of in my decks, is Lava Coil.
Yeah, Lava Coil is pretty sick. I like this card a lot.
I think it's good against the green-black decks because it exiling is a real relevant thing against them, and you need to deny them Find Broker equity or Izoni or Find equity. I think it's really good against the red decks because killing a Phoenix for 2 mana and actually killing it is a really big deal.
Yep.
I think it's reasonable against the March of the Multitudes decks because it kills Tristani or Venerate Loxodon.
You really got to kill the Tristani.
Yeah. And then I think obviously it's reasonable against these Crackling Drake decks because either it exiles their Arclight Phoenix or more likely you get to kill their Crackling Drake.
Yeah, or Enigma Drake.
Yeah, you
whichever
get to kill
one.
their Drakes or whatever.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think these decks are actually pretty good against green-black specifically. I have no idea if they're good against anything else.
I think they might be pretty good against control. I think there's a world where they're pretty alright against control, especially the ones that have like recursive threats and stuff.
Yeah,
like
the ones that have recursive threats I can definitely see being better. I feel like you're still quite threat light, so you're still kind of in this position, and your threats are being 4 mana is this slightly awkward spot where it's just a little bit hard to protect them.
Yeah, I feel that.
And so you have to wait quite a long time, and by that point you're a control opponent. If you're the one who feels they have to like blink first, which you probably do, because your control opponent will be bigger than you, then it's still going to be kind of hard to like get this down and protect it. But it also depends a bit on what the control decks removal suites look like. If everyone's playing Lightning Strike, then I'm pretty excited to play Crackling Drake.
I also will say, like, I think the play pattern, like, I think basically control's probably favored in a lot of these decks, but they still have to play it the right way. Like, there's no world where they get to kind of slam Teferi early or whatever. They have to be very patient and disciplined, because you might just be like, cool, flashback radical idea, put Arclight Phoenix in the graveyard, shock your Teferi, and then play another spell. And they're like, oh, Teferi's dead now.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that they have these lines available to them.
Mm-hmm.
Although it is worth pointing out that I think you saw one list that was playing Arclight Phoenix.
Yeah, it was only one of them.
But I've seen I've seen quite a few lists like playing Crackling Drake. Of various different shades. So like, talking about the whole archetype, like as a whole, I think that my take on it is that you have a lot of card advantage, so you can kind of fight the control decks on that angle, but it still feels like an awkward spot to be in against them. Yeah,
their spells are going to be more relevant than yours, you reckon?
Yeah, I just also think that you have to blink first, and in the control mirror, if you have to blink first, then you're kind of... It's sort of similar to a control mirror, but they have more ways of interacting with the stuff you're doing than you do of them.
I bet you this deck is actually pretty good against aggro decks.
Do you think so?
Your threats are X4s, so a lot of the removal doesn't
But they're all, like, really expensive.
But you run a bunch of shocks and lightning strikes.
Yeah, but, like, Experimental Frenzy.
I mean, that's fair. That's going to be your biggest enemy, is you got to make sure that gets countered on the way down.
Yeah. But... like, that and Rekindling Phoenix. Well, Rekindling Phoenix seems sick against Crackling Drake.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think that the burn decks, like, you just might not kill them fast enough.
That could be.
But I haven't really played enough with these Crackling Drake decks. I played against them with green-black and found them to be quite problematic there because they play a lot of card advantage.
Yeah.
Which is, like, hard for you because you're this grindy deck that's kind of trying to 1-for-1 or, like, semi 2-for-1 your opponent.
Mm-hmm. 1.5 for 1.
Kind of, yeah. Like, that's sort of what all the Explore creatures do. And Chupacabra is normally, like, a straight 2-for-1. And, so theoretically, Chupacabra should be really good against these, like, Crackling Drake decks, but basically they just get to, like, attack you on a bunch of axes. They get to pressure your life total, and they get to, like, play a card advantage game. So it's really hard to sideboard against them, because you're like, oh, I kind of want this Argle's Blood fast. Oh, but they just run a bunch of, like, lightning strikes.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, I can't just go to, like, 6, they'll just kill me, or they'll just resolve a Crackling Drake, and suddenly I have to kill it right now.
Yes.
Or, like, the game is over.
And you can only run so many removal spells when you're so based around creatures.
And also just, like, well, it's not just that, it's that, like, you can only run so many removal spells when your opponent has the game plan of just sitting there, like, casting Chemises inside a bunch of times.
That's true as well.
Like, that's my problem that I'm saying more, is that, like, you can play all your removal spells, but then you'll end up sitting there with a grip full of removal spells, and your opponent is just playing, like, a control deck.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also can't sit there, like, playing all your anti-control cards, because a lot of them, like, punish you for, like, put you at a low life total, and they'll punish you for that.
Yeah, for sure.
So I find basically that it's problematic because they attack you from a lot of angles.
So if talking about PPTQ season coming up,
yeah,
or some other tournaments, I'm going to Lille in a couple weeks.
Cool.
And I'm pretty excited about that. What would you play?
Right now, I would play some variant of the Green-Black Finebroker decks because I have the most experience with it, and I think that this might actually be a standard format where just being experienced in your deck and knowing what your plans are against everybody is more valuable than playing the best deck, because I think it's wide enough that it's really hard to know what the best deck is.
Mm-hmm.
I also just think that I'm comfortable against a lot of things I would expect to see in Scotland, which is either the mirror or control.
For sure.
You'll probably see some amount of aggressive decks, but most people will be playing, like, if Teferi is a good card, and or Ravenous Chupacabra is a good card, I think people will generally be playing like those cards.
Yeah.
And so Yeah, and I feel like I have plans that are pretty good against the mirror, and I pretty well understand what the mirror is about. And also, if I'm playing the Sultai list, I think I'm favoured in the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, yeah, I'm pretty happy to, like, just rock that at a local PBTQ if I was going.
To be honest, I'm pretty much on the same page as you. Like, I find it really hard to see how you're going to be in a field that's too unfavourable if you're playing a green-black variant of... Except for maybe, like, the Zoni variants, like, really, like, zero non-creature spells. There's a couple of those. But I think it's really hard to see how the Rock deck gets extremely punished. Except for by decks that basically make their other matchups weaker, I think.
Yeah.
To get better in the mirror. I think, outside of that, I think actually Sultai is super interesting. And us talking about it, I think, like, that could just be, like, the tech. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that was the case. But I think, like, the control decks really need to figure out a strategy that, like, puts them in a better position against Rock if they really want to be in a dominant position.
I mean, I can speak of my experience, and it's very possible that the matchup is worse for Rock than I've been experiencing, either because all my data is anecdotal, or because I've, faced weaker opponents, or anything like that.
But the thing is, like, I still think there's something that can be, like... I mean, it's almost like modern, like, blue-white control versus Jund. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, well, control beats mid-range. It's like, not when you can grind value. Like, really, really hard. And this is the thing, is, like, if you misstep, or you don't have the counterspell for the right thing, sometimes you're just in a pile of, like, oh, God, now I need 2 more cards to catch up. And so, like, it doesn't surprise me, actually. Like, I think, like... There's probably a reasonable amount of games that you lose against control if, like, possibly even within the first 5 turns. But there's a lot of games where they go long and they're like, actually, I don't have a place where I can stick Teferi where you don't get a ton of advantage. You know what I mean? Or you can just kill it.
Yeah, the fact that you have the
Assassin's Trophy.
Yeah, Assassin's Trophy and the Eldritch Reborn are, like, really powerful tools to have access to. Obviously, Assassin's Trophy and Teferi isn't great in a card advantage scenario.
Yeah.
Because they've drawn a card and then you give them a land.
Mm.
But, like, being able to kill Teferi for 2 mana is really powerful because it lets you, like, pressure their mana. They'll untap their lands with Teferi and you're, like, they were planning to untap 3 or untap so they had 3 so they could, like, Sinister Sabotage or Ionize you.
Mm.
But you, like, killed their Teferi. So now they're like, okay, well, I am untapping... I guess they're untapping 4 at that point, but, like, my Teferi's gone, so I'm not really protecting him anymore.
Yeah.
Oh. And, like, he still has, like, a board of, like, 2 or 3 crappy creatures that I do need to deal with at some point. I don't know, Assassin's Trophy's been a big deal, and then also often I found that you can Assassin's Trophy in the end step, and they're like, I don't really want to counter this, but I really have, like, basically, like, I kind of want to counter this because I want to keep my Teferi alive, but I can't. Because if I do, they'll untap and they'll slam the Eldritch Reborn. And then I lose.
Yeah.
So I kind of just have to take this Teferi's just gone. And then I guess I have to draw another one.
Actually, okay, I've decided when I'm playing my next standard tournament. Dimir Spybug.
I mean,
let's go!
If you really want to, you can do that.
Alright, I think we've said enough about the Pillars of Standard.
Probably, yeah. I think that's where the format's going. If you disagree with us, feel free to leave a comment or a little review, little thing telling us how wrong we are, telling us what the real Pillars of Standard are.
Or if you have a really good list with Dimir Spybug, could you send it to me? Because I love that card.
Please don't send him to Dimir Spybug list. Don't enable this man's terrible, terrible habits.
I've gotten so many trophies with Spybugs, though. It's so good.
If you do have a 6 Spybug list, I probably actually would be interested in seeing that. So, yeah, please get in touch with us if you have any thoughts about this episode or any real strong feelings. I always like to hear strong feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Holt deals with that all of the time in his daily life as a teenage boy.
I'm a real boy. I'm a real man. Come on.
Yeah, so if you want to find us specifically, you can find us on Twitter at F_Ironside for myself, or if you really must speak to Holt, then he is...
Send your Dimir Spybug list to @Cap'n Powerhouse at Twitter, so that's CAPNPOWERHAUS.
Yep, and as always, please check out our sponsor and good friend,
loyal, devoted ruler,
Murphy's Vault. which can be found at murphysvault.com, where they sell singles, event tickets. There is a Legacy tournament coming up on the 20th of October, which I'm probably going to play in.
I mean, if you go to the Legacy tournament, you'll see me there too.
Yeah. Holt's not going to play Legacy because he's not a cool dude.
I mean, I'm just too busy being on Team Scotland. So
he's not a cool dude.
Whatever.
Yeah, there's a Legacy tournament on the 20th. Let's win a foil Jace the Mind Sculptor, which is a pretty cool thing to do, because last time there was a Legacy tournament in Scotland, it was win a Tundra, and I play Stoneblade without all the requisite expensive cards. And one of those cards was a Tundra, but it's not anymore. And I'm hoping that one of those cards was a Jace, and it won't be anymore.
I mean, whatever. I won an Underground Seed before I won these things, so
right,
and then sold it right before it spiked.
Whereas
I felt like an idiot.
I still have my Tundra because I want to actually play games of Legacy with blue cards.
That's dumb. I think you should just play planes. Anyways,
nah.
check out their sponsor for any of your singles or sealed product needs.
Or any of your article needs, as we do in fact have articles. I think that one about the best Commander cards from Guilds of Ravnica, written by Ian McEwen, went up.
I think Martin actually did a big review on the Limited as well.
Yeah,
if you want to hear more about Dimir Spybug.
So Martin's like real good at Limited, and his analysis is really worth reading. I definitely encourage people to look at the stuff he's writing. It's like genuinely really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, I think that's it though. I think that's all we have time for today. I'm sorry to leave our listeners like this, but all good things they must end at some point, right?
The sooner we leave, the sooner we'll be back.
I'm not sure that's true, but we do have to go. So we've been from the vault. And what did I say?
I think it's something about you've been fantastic.
Yeah, that's it.